Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Randy Hawkins, and welcome to the Public Outreach, Education, and Wellness Committee meeting. I have a script I have to read first. I want to ask all of us to please turn off our cell phones to silent and make sure they're off the table so we can avoid feedback noise. You may notice committee members assessing their laptops during the meetings. They're using their laptops solely to assess the board meeting material that are in electronic format. This is an official business meeting of the Medical Board of California. As such, disruptions of the committee's business will not be tolerated. We have a designated time on the agenda for public comment and ask for public comment on each agenda items. I ask that you be respectful of the need to conduct the committee's business. Should anyone disrupt the meeting, I will ask the person to conduct himself or herself in such a manner that permits the committee to transact its business. This meeting will be available via teleconference. Individuals listening to the meeting will have an opportunity to provide public comment and will be assisted by a moderator who will be facilitating the teleconference process. For those members of the public participating via teleconference, please wait until the moderator has introduced you before you make your comments. To request to make a comment during the public comment period, press star one rather. You will hear a tone indicating you're in the queue for comment. If you change your mind and do not want to make a comment, press the pound sign. Assistance available throughout the teleconference meeting. To request a specialist, press star 0. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes per agenda item. However, during agenda item 2, public comments on items not on the agenda, the committee has limited the public comment period for individuals on the teleconference to 20 minutes. In addition, public comments from individuals here at the meeting will also be limited to 20 minutes. Therefore, after 20 minutes, no further comments will be accepted. During public comment on any agenda item, 10 minutes will be allowed for comments from individuals on the teleconference line and those in the audience. After 10 minutes, no further comments will be accepted. Business service staff will be assisting me with receiving the public comments via teleconference during this meeting. The committee welcomes public comments on any item on the agenda, and it's the committee's intent to ask for public comment prior to committee taking action on any agenda item. If for some reason I forget to ask the public comment on an agenda item and you wish to speak on that item, please raise your hand. You'll be recognized. I'd like to request all speakers complete presenter slips so I can call you by name at the appropriate time and that the record on this meeting can be full and complete. However, this is voluntary. Please give the speaker slips to Ms. Simones. Ms. Simones, could you identify yourself? I'll do my very best to call upon everyone who has supplied a slip for the agenda item and recognize those who wish to make a last-minute comment. I want to remind all speakers to please stay on topic and keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. This meeting is being called to order at 12:54. Ms. Toof, please call the roll.
Dr. Hawkins?
Present.
Dr. Kraus?
Here.
Dr. Levine? Here. Dr. Lewis?
Present.
Ms. Pines? Here. Ms. Sutton-Wills?
Here.
Mr. Wormuth?
Here.
Thank you.
The next agenda item is public comments. I have the following speaker slips. Any speaker slips? This is public comments on items not on the agenda. Are there any speaker slips? I have no speaker slips for items not on the agenda. Are there any comments on the phones?
Ernie, do we have any comments on the line?
No comment from the telephone.
The next agenda item 3 is approval of the minutes from the May 5th, 2016 meetings.
Move approval.
Second.
Are there any comments or corrections from committee members? We have a motion for approval. There's a second. Ms. Toof, call the roll.
Dr. Hawkins?
Public comment on the minutes from the May 2016 meeting. Thank you. Comments from the phone?
No comment from the phone.
This is
Dr.
my-
Hawkins?
Yes.
Dr. Kraus?
Aye.
Dr. Levine? Approve. Dr. Lewis?
Aye.
Ms. Pines?
Yes.
Ms. Sutton-Wills?
Yes.
Mr. Wormuth.
Aye.
Thank you.
So this is my first meeting as chair, so I'll be helped along repeatedly, I suspect. My intents are good, though. I would like to, at this time, welcome Dr. Searles, who's going to give us a presentation on physician burnout. The next item is a presentation on physician burnout from Dr. Searles. Dr. Searles is a duly board-certified family physician and psychiatrist and a clinical professor in the Department of Family Medicine, Public Health, and Psychiatry at the University of California, San Diego. He's a director of UCSD PACE Professional Board Boundaries Program. He is currently the medical director of the UCSD Family Health and Wellness Clinic. He has previously served as the director of the UCSD Combined Family Medicine and Psychiatry Residency Program. His particular areas of interest included doctor-patient relationship and burnout and resilience among executives and professionals, including physicians. Welcome, Dr. Searles, and thank you for coming in to present to us today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hawkins, and I want to thank the committee for the invitation to speak this afternoon about a topic that I think is, we all agree, is very important, and we're learning more and more about. So physician burnout is but let me preface my comments by saying I know I have a short amount of time, just 20 minutes with some questions at the end. So I've tried to put together an overview, and I'm happy to answer questions and then answer questions from the committee through email contact after the presentation. So, just to review a little bit about what burnout is, we think a lot about physician burnout in lots of different terms and trajectories, but as we look at it, this is how a lot of physicians describe being burned out. They say things just aren't fun anymore, they get cynical. We see that a lot on rounds and in their work life and their home life. They feel like they're going through the motions. Within the UCSD PACE program, we have a class for just about everything. We've got an anger management class, we've got boundaries, we've got medical record keeping. I will tell you that burnout is, we know it's pervasive. It's certainly pervasive within the paradigm of the courses that we provide at PACE. So sometimes, an angry outburst is really the tip of the iceberg, and underneath the water is physician burnout and a difficult time managing lots of different aspects of balance in work and life and things like that. So although these are often how aspects of burnout present, often we focus on the behavior rather than the root cause, and that's one of the big challenges with burnout. I have chronic tardiness on here, and certainly that is one of the initial kinds of things we start to see in physicians and in professionals generally who don't tend to be late for things. They don't get promotions. They don't get additional scheduled surgeries because they show up late all the time. So when that starts to happen, we start to recognize that maybe there's something smoldering, and perhaps we should identify maybe a root cause. Of course, the last two bullets are where we are especially interested in burnout. One of them is the deterioration of patient care and negative outcomes as a result. And then self-medication. It turns out physicians have prescription pads, and they're not afraid to use them, and sometimes on themselves, which can be inherently problematic. These are some of the challenges. When we define burnout, when we study it, we talk about it as a syndrome of chronic occupational stress. It's really about work, although we certainly know that burned out physicians have difficulty at home. But it's the chronic occupational stress that is the core principle around burnout. We screen it with something called the Maslach Burnout Inventory, which is really the gold standard. We look at three different areas. We look at emotional exhaustion, we look at depersonalization, and a sense of personal achievement. Emotional exhaustion comes from the daily trials and tribulations of work as a physician, and depersonalization is a disconnect between physicians and their patients, their colleagues, their family. It's really a wedge that's driven between them and the sort of touchstones of interpersonal relationships, sometimes that brought them into medicine in the first place. So it's very insidious and very damaging. And then that last aspect is really the fundamental question of, does what I do make a difference? So it's hard to get up every day and do what you do when you think that at the end of the workday that what you've done that day hasn't made any difference. And that's very ominous. So those are the spheres that we look at when we measure it with the Maslow burnout inventory. How does burnout feel? When you ask physicians, what is it about, your work that's leading to this burnout with you? And we've identified it and we start to peel the onion away. It's this sort of feeling overwhelmed by lots of different things that create imbalances. It's very subjective. People will describe it in different ways and different burdens that they feel like they're bearing at work. And, we've got the EMR, we've got, life and work balance, we have hospital insurance, paperwork. Everybody's got a different take on it. There are some common themes, but by and large, they feel somewhat oppressed by the structure of the work environment that they're in, regardless of the work environment that they're in. So surgeons in the OR will have feelings that are different than pediatricians who are seeing 40 patients a day, but they each have their own experience. Physicians have an additional risk, not unlike other high-functioning professionals, that has to do with their worldview, the way that they look at the world around them and how they look at the work that they do. We measure this in our courses at PACE. When I have a group of physicians who come to our program, I do a number of assessments, and we've identified a number of character traits, of core beliefs that we think increase their risk inherently of a lot of things, but certainly burnout is one of them. And feeling like everything has to be perfect, the need to control, a sense of high achievement. A lot of times these are why they're successful, these attributes, but they can also be problematic. Certainly the second to the last, I'll touch on a little bit further along in the course, but difficulty asking for help. Physicians are not really great at raising their hand and saying, hey, I'm struggling and I need help. And they're not really rewarded for that, as we'll talk about. So I know that this group is probably well aware of some of the burnout literature, but I wanted to talk about just a couple of sentinel studies that are important to know. This came in the Archives of Internal Medicine, 2012, and it was a huge study. Over 7,000 physicians were looked at, and they wanted to know, what's the prevalence of burnout? I ask in this slide, can you think of the top 3 specialties? You might have some ideas. It's very difficult to read, but number 1 is emergency medicine, and it's by a large margin, actually. It's almost 2/3 of emergency medicine physicians in this study of over 7,000 total docs met the criteria for burnout. But what I like people to look at in this slide is not what's at the top, what gets your attention. It's actually what's at the bottom. So dermatology was actually one of the least burned out groups on this slide. Dermatology. It was only 1/3. But if I told you 1/3 of anything was happening to anybody, you would say that's a big number. If I told you 1/3 of the people in this county are going to get Zika in the next 6 months, we would call that a public health crisis. So in this group of over 7,000 physicians, the numbers are telling us that the least burned out group of all of us is still 1/3. And that's a big, big number for us to deal with. Now, this was a snapshot. They followed this study with numbers from 2011 and 2014, and what they found is that over these years, and this first study was smack dab in the middle, we find mean burnout rates among physicians are going up, and their job satisfaction, the most ominous component of burnout, is going down from 2011 to 2014. And they find that work-life balance, which is like we need another acronym, but WLB, is getting worse. And American medicine appears to be at what the author describes as a tipping point, with more than half now of total physicians experiencing burnout. Those are massive numbers. So I want to differentiate very briefly between different groups of physicians aging out, burning out, and opting out of medicine. And there's burnout, it certainly has some crossover here, but we know that our population of physicians is getting older. The percentage of population of physicians who are older is increasing. 33% of our physician population is over 50, 25% are over 60, and of the older physicians, 62% say they're likely to retire in the next 1 to 3 years. They say it has to do with how the future of medicine is changing in their perception, and they feel that medicine is in jeopardy. Older physicians tend to be especially vulnerable to burnout because there's been a major shift in their practice lives, whether it's the EMR or burdensome regulations, however they see that, and because they can retire, they're leaving the workforce early. Some physicians are opting out of full-time medicine, and they're also decreasing the physician workforce by working part-time. And then some are burning out completely. Now, we know in this slide we see that in 2012, the percentage in red of physicians over 55 has increased from decade to decade. And we have a very large older population of physicians right on the bubble of leaving medicine, which doesn't bode well for the physician workforce. But when you look at younger physicians, over 50% of physicians under 35 years old are leaving medicine, or they want to leave medicine. That's very worrisome. We expect the older physicians to age out. But now younger physicians are considering opting out with lower work hours, therefore less access for patients. And it's not just primary care. Other disciplines, cardiology, nephrology, the scale from 0 to 7 here in this slide tells us if it's what's the likelihood of you leaving medicine in the next 3 years. And over half of each of these groups plan to leave in the next 3 years. That is not okay. So I was asked to talk about medical errors and burnout. Is there a link? There absolutely is a link, and there has been. These are studies that I've listed just that highlight this over the last, since 1985 all the way through 2012. And in these slides, what we find is there's a very strong link. And I picked these studies, and they're in your slide set to look at. They represent service learners, including residents. They represent primary care physicians. They represent specialists, and they represent several different practice paradigms. And in all of these studies, there is a link between physician burnout and medical errors that cause patient harm. Now, in the last 2 or 3 years, and in fact, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, the top study was released just 2 weeks ago, we're starting to see some pushback in the literature. The first study shows, and what I want to do is I want to just very briefly talk about what's new, because we're starting to hear, well, maybe there isn't a connection. And I want to pick through this and leave you with this criticism of this. And the first study highlights one issue. There's 54 service learners that are studied here. They gave them a survey, and after the second survey, about half of them dropped out of the picture altogether. And what they found in the study is that actually, if you're burned out, you have a decreased risk of making medical errors. And part of the challenge with a study like that is the numbers are very small, and the return rate of additional information very small. And so that's an inherent problem with a lot of these studies. They're not very well powered with lots of people being asked the question. The second study looked at the aspect of depression and burnout. We have a major crossover of major depressive disorder with burnout. And there's a lot of crossover in symptomatology. So it's very hard, and this study points out, it's very difficult to parse out a depression disorder and burnout. And because they go along together so frequently, they're usually both in play for many, many physicians. The third study looked at a review of many, many studies to make the link, and it found that, yeah, there certainly is an absolute link, but they also noted, rightly so, that there's a paucity of studies that look prospectively. What we do is we look at errors and we go, gee, was that person who made the error burned out? Well, yes, they were. But what we don't have is a lot of studies to follow physicians to look and see if they make errors if they're burned out. And it's a very difficult thing to study. The last thing we look at is whether or not keeping the same structure with work hours and sleep hours and time away from work, but making more flexibility happen, will that help? And the answer is, well, it doesn't hurt. And so we've lowered the bar a little bit by simply saying, well, it probably isn't going to hurt more people if we do that. But we haven't raised the bar to say we can continue to protect patients at a higher level with intervention A, B, or C. So these studies are a little problematic, but more than anything, it's actually what we're not looking at all that's the big problem. So we're not measuring some very important things. So let me give you an example. If I have a physician who's burned out, who is struggling in some way, and they give an additional dose of medication in the IV, that's an adverse drug event. But if I have a physician who sees a patient at the end of the day and writes them MS Contin, even though it may not be clinically indicated, because that patient is the only thing between them and getting home, and they're just tired of being at the office, that's not recorded as an adverse drug event. It's not even recorded as a patient error. It's recorded as a style of practice, which means it's not recorded at all. So many things are happening with burned out physicians that we don't measure. If a physician gets angry in the OR and throws a scalpel across the room, because they are having a hard time managing life and work balance, that's not recorded as a patient error. It may be a disruptive physician, but we're not capturing that data. If a physician chooses not to adequately document in a medical record because they just don't want to make the time, that's not recorded as a patient error. So I will tell you, the problem is lots of things are happening. And we know in PACE when physicians come to us, we are measuring them to a person, they are struggling with burnout. But they're coming because they're considered disruptive in some ways and not in ways that we're measuring in terms of patient errors. But absolutely, this increases patient risk. And it's very difficult to know what's happening there because we're not studying it well. So where have we been? This is a quick study that looked at orthopedic residents and faculty. They found in orange that residents tended to be more burned out. But I will tell you the faculty in blue were not off the hook altogether. In fact, half of them had that aspect of depersonalization, which is that wedge between them and the people they interrelate with, which is a very challenging aspect of burnout. And that was in the seasoned faculty. So even though they're working less hours, they're still struggling in many ways. When they looked at this study, they found that aspects that increased the risk of burnout were work hours, conflict between work and life balance, discord with other team members, and debt, which I want to come back to. And debt was an independent risk factor for burnout. Protective factors being a parent, which is an interesting aspect. Spending time with a spouse, having a physician parent, but also deriving satisfaction from connecting with other people and rejecting isolation. I tell physicians all the time, isolation is always bad for you. And if you tend to connect with people well and avoid isolation, you tend to be more resilient. So a quick cartoon from Child Psychology. You're spending the best years of your life doing a job that you hate so you can buy stuff you don't need to support a lifestyle you don't enjoy. That sounds crazy to me. And so there is a necessary recalibration of priorities, which when I sit down with physicians individually or in workshops or groups in some way, I ask them, tell me what's important to you. And I think we would all agree that if you look at this slide, those look like really important things. And then I ask them, what do you do with your time? And the mismatch between what they value and how they spend their time is palpable. So there are lots of drivers for this, which I'll touch on briefly. But when we look at the pipeline of making a physician, there are lots of aspects to talk about here, but just three that are salient for us. One of them is that physicians, they tend not to reach out and ask for help because they grow up in a learning environment where they're not rewarded for not knowing something. They're not rewarded for being vulnerable. I don't know something, pick me. That's not how physicians roll. The way that physicians roll is if you don't know something, you're quiet. And you hope somebody else gets picked on because you saw what happened the last time you didn't know something. That carries through all the way through into practice and into life. So when physicians are struggling, they don't ask for help. Another aspect, and I do a lot of this teaching with medical students and residents, a lot of, when you look at how physicians become physicians, we are high school students, we go to college, we go to medical school, we go to residency, you become a doctor, you make 6 figures. A lot of students, when I poll them in a room, how many of you have ever had a job? About half of physicians who are going to be physicians have had a regular job, have had a paycheck and had to deal with a paycheck and deal with how to deal with the money that you get from a regular paycheck because they've been doing one thing after another until they graduate from residency. Okay, so that creates an environment where physicians tend not to be great at managing money or doing anything other than being in school. And that's a little bit of a problem when it comes to all of a sudden being a physician leader, having a lot of responsibility, and maybe not having all of the coping skills to deal with it. Physician leaders become leaders because they're physicians, not because they have leadership skills. And this is a very challenging moment where you have all the responsibility with less than the necessary skills. Very frustrating and very risky. So when it comes to managing money, we know that burned out physicians are more likely to declare they have unmanageable debt. They have a hard time with that, and they feel trapped. Less than half have adequate savings compared with peers. I underscore this because physicians are inherently known for being poor money managers, and having a difficult time running businesses. And so they feel often trapped by that. Burned out physicians of any age, when we look at life and work balance, they're more likely to be obese or overweight, they're less likely to exercise, they're less likely to spend time volunteering, and they're far less likely to take vacations. Burned out physicians who need them are far less likely to take them. So when we're addressing physician burnout, I certainly work at the personal level with groups and individuals. We look at the workplace. And then I'll offer a couple of ideas as well in the regulatory aspects. So from a personal change, I won't go through all of these, but I will say that the number one thing I do with physicians is to help them recognize that they're struggling. A lot of them just don't see that. Everybody else is burned out except for me. I ask physicians not to heal themselves, so get a physician for yourself. It's remarkable how few physicians have seen a physician for themselves in the last year. When I poll physicians, and I'm talking about rooms of 500 physicians, how many of you have seen a doctor for yourself in the last year? It's far less than half. So this is it's hard to be in the business of convincing everybody else they need to see a doctor when you're not seeing one yourself. Mindfulness, and I mean evidence-based mindfulness, works with physicians. That's a separate talk, but certainly an important aspect of what we do at UCSD. Accepting praise is an important procedure that physicians need to develop in order to have that sense of, does what I do make a difference? I talk a lot about friendship in the age of Facebook and having real friends, and that's a whole separate discussion, but certainly making those connections is important because rejecting isolation is essential. I help them address the time and priority mismatch. These are the things you say are important, but this is what you do with your time. How do you live in both of those worlds? It's not really sustainable. And then I really do talk about financial literacy and recalibrating how much it costs every month to be you. Because if you are barely making ends meet as a physician, you have not done the math correctly. And unfortunately, that's the reality for a large majority of burned out physicians. From the workplace point of view, it's important to make the distinction between wellness and well-being as we see it. A physician well-being committee is really about secondary prevention. You have a disruptive, struggling physician, they go to the physician well-being committee. That's about making sure that you're not impaired or that you're not struggling in some way that creates harm to patients or colleagues, staff, or the environment. That's physician well-being. The toothpaste is out of the tube. We want to remediate or we want to replace. Wellness is a primary prevention strategy. It's keeping physicians well who are already well and continuing the path to staying balanced and well. That primary prevention is not the focus of the workplace. Very few physician workplaces have a wellness strategy for physicians. They have a well-being strategy when it comes off the rails. And those are very different things. I talk about the 360-degree evaluation. At PACE, we send physicians off into a 360-degree where they, every single person who interacts with them during their workday gives us feedback about them. And I've been around for a long time. I've run these. I've been the target of these just to see how that feels. It's very intimidating. But I've never once seen a spouse satisfaction survey or a kid satisfaction survey. Never. So what if we ask the question of how successful are you? How many times did you make it to your daughter's ballet recital? Let's measure that. How many times did you make it to dinner on time when you said you would? Let's measure that. Physicians, part of the challenge of a physician is they tend to manage up to where they're being evaluated. How many RVUs did you generate? What's your patient satisfaction score? What was your average hypertension rate on your hypertensive patients? And they do a great job there. But they don't do a great job here because no one's looking. And they take what's left at the end of the workday home to the people who are supposed to matter the most, but we're not asking them the questions. That's problematic. We talk about addressing isolation. At UCSD, we do this through groups with physicians. We get them together, talk about the common physician experience. I recommend at UCSD, certainly, I run the Boundaries and the Burnout program for our medical students. We talk about getting in early and talking about these things early. In our Boundaries program, I have physicians all the time who say, I wish I'd known this or heard about this in medical school or residency. But we don't talk about it there. We do at UCSD. Making sure physicians take breaks from work and check out so that they can unplug, sometimes literally, and start to spend time on those gentler influences at home. Mandatory primary care annual exams. At UCSD, I'm really trying to push making it a requirement for physicians to get credentialed at UCSD to demonstrate they've seen a physician for their own health care in the last year. I think that should be a minimal expectation. Are you taking care of yourself? Or rather, more importantly, are you letting someone else take care of you? Or is it you writing yourself a prescription on the sly because that's all you make time for? That's dangerous and wrong, and we should encourage other behavior. And then fiscal literacy. And every workplace is different. Every physician has a different relationship with money and how their retirement plans, things like that. It's important to bring that down to the level at which they work, but the workplace is a great place to start talking about how to manage their money. From a regulatory point of view, obviously it's important to ask the question, how many physicians in California are burned out? If it's along national norms, it's more than half. At UCSD, we have a director of patient experience who met with me, said, Chris, I want to do this burnout survey of all of our faculty. And I said, Tom, that's great. What are you going to do with the answers? Because the answer is going to be more than half are burned out. So before you ask the question, what will you do with the data? Right? That's one of the fundamental aspects of medicine. Don't ask the question unless you know what you're going to do. And not a great answer because we don't really know what to do. I recommend asking the question, have you, at least from a sort of probing point of view, have you had a physician for yourself? Have you taken time off for yourself? And are you interested in learning more about how to improve your financial literacy as a physician? Those three questions go to where the data tells us we're really lacking with physicians. Self-care, time for yourself, and managing your money in a way that doesn't make you feel trapped. I would consider highly recommending primary care for physicians, making sure they have that, and then moving toward mandating. I think personally it's very reasonable to require physicians in order to practice medicine in the state of California that they've demonstrated that they are approaching self-care in a meaningful way. I would recommend that physicians who take care of physicians have specific guidance about how to do that along the lines of the aviator medical exam. Pilots have a specific exam they're required to go through in order to fly a plane. We have people's lives in our hands. I'm not saying that you should mandate, but it's very helpful to give physicians taking care of physicians some guidance about special questions, special aspects you might want to consider in the care of a colleague, not the least of which is boundaries and limit setting, because that's a big challenge if you've ever had a physician as a patient. But having that special list or algorithm it can help guide them and keep people literally on the same page. Policies that help differentiate between wellness and well-being, and encouraging workplaces that are where physicians are making their livelihood to support them in wellness, not just in identifying secondary measures in terms of physician well-being. I think that is an important top-down approach. And then we really need to measure burnout among physicians who are considered disruptive. And I will tell you, my experience after measuring this in hundreds of physicians is that the vast majority meet the criteria for burnout and are also referred because of disruptive behavior. We integrate a mini burnout curriculum in some of our PACE courses like anger management and boundaries. I think it's important to actually carve out a burnout curriculum for disruptive behavior and make sure that it's measured and addressed and not just pepper it in to the program like, you're here for this disruptive behavior. Let's leave it up to the CME provider to decide whether or not we're going to add elements of burnout. I'll tell you, my experience and the data tells me 85% of these physicians are burned out. We should be dealing with it with every disruptive physician. And so with that, I'll end, and I thank you for the extra time.
A pleasure. Dr. Searles, thank you for agreeing and giving this very, very important topic to us. It's clear we're going to have to visit this on a regular basis. Are there comments or questions from the board? Dr. Levine?
So thank you so much. That's a very exhaustive review of the literature. And just one point. or one question for you. The association, as you pointed out, is not causality. And certainly my own experience is that when a physician has an episode where a medical error has occurred, where they feel responsible, what follows is a pretty significant impact on the physician. And so which is the chicken and which is the egg? And I worry that link not be interpreted as evidence of causation, that these are interdependent events that happen, and it's sometimes hard to separate whether the burnout is a consequence of the isolation that results from shame, that results from withdrawal, and a sense of I'm no good anymore. I know it. I'm just waiting for everyone else to find it out. And I certainly support your focus on creating environments that promote wellness that is very separate from well-being. And certainly my own experience in a large group practice is that, as you said, the biggest risk is isolation.
So you make a really important point, which is that certainly when medical errors are made, physicians often struggle, and there's a separate body of literature that talks about that, and it's also a burgeoning body of literature. It's not fully fleshed out. We have, at UCSD, we have a program called Code Lavender and another group called the HERE Committee, which is responsible for helping physicians who are struggling in lots of ways, not the least of which is depression. But Code Lavender places a number of peers in various workplace environments, and when adverse events happen, after we do our debriefing and things like that, we continue to engage the physician or sometimes nursing staff or what have you, so that we can make sure that we are supporting them as much as possible. We recognize that the weight of responsibility often falls on the shoulders of the physician. And we live in this world where we expect a team-based approach to medicine, but we ultimately hold physicians accountable, and physicians themselves hold themselves accountable. And we need to move toward not just modeling, the group-based model to delivering care, but also in supporting all team members. It's hard for physicians to see themselves as a team member in the sense that, when I talk about peers, I'm talking about there are nurses, there are front desk folks who we consider peers who help us identify struggling staff members, including physicians. The narcissism is probably too strong of a word, but there's a certain aspect among physicians that say, well, that's not my peer. But we're all in it together, and the support has to be bidirectional. And so I think that's an important aspect. We tried to lay down some of the structure to offer that support when there are adverse events, but it is a real challenge.
Dr. Kraus?
Thank you so much for being here. Stress and burnout doesn't begin after you get your MD or your medical license. It begins in medical school, if not before medical school. Are you working with the medical school to incorporate this into the curriculum and the medical student experience?
Yeah, that's such an important point. And we accept medical students to medical school because they get great MCAT scores and GPAs, and they do have a great interview and a great application, and those are all important attributes. But we don't really ask them, how resilient are you? And we try to kind of look at it in different ways. But physicians are people, and we all struggle in very human ways. And putting on the white coat does not bestow any magic, for sure, in that regard. But to answer your question, yes. So at UCSD, I developed the curriculum for resilience and burnout for physicians, as well as the professionalism curriculum, and we'll be running the clinical foundations curriculum at UCSD that encompasses the first 2 years that covers those topics. I will say those things are at UCSD partly because I'm at UCSD. It's not universal to the medical student experience that those things are addressed. From a residency director point of view, where I played that role for a number of years at UCSD, the ACGME hands over a residency director a mandate to teach professionalism. But how that looks is very different. And the reality is that doesn't get as much play as the check boxes that, are the number of procedures you've done or those other mandates in terms of training. So we have to weight the training of professionalism for service learners on par with other aspects of medical training. We need to protect the time for that and develop engaging curriculum. And those things are happening little by little, more in some places than others, but very essential to, I think, developing fully functional physicians who will stand the test of time in the world that they're practicing in.
Dr. Lewis?
Yes, to me, this is the best of all worlds. You have a system already set up, you have a university, but in many of us, we're in environments where either non-physicians determine our performance evaluations and criteria and numbers, or they're non-practicing physicians that are involved in our performance numbers. And until those people recognize how it is to be on the front lines, these things won't change. And I can give you an example in the Palm Springs there at Eisenhower, they have a thing called Press-Ganey scores, and other places have, things like patient satisfaction, and there's such a drive and stress to achieve those high patient satisfaction scores that causes a lot of stress, and it's tied into compensation. So until the administration recognizes that these problems will occur because you've created them because of the economics in medicine, we're going to have a problem with physicians leaving. They're leaving in the Department of Corrections, the burnout, the stress. So I don't know how you really address that. We've also instituted, I think you mentioned a team huddle. That takes away a lot of the isolationism, and we treat everybody as colleagues. Mm-hmm. So if you have any comments.
Yeah,
about that,
I have a couple of comments about that. So this is certainly true that, my computer there's some security things. I apologize. So I didn't know that popped up. It is true that this is a different world. So physicians at the university, physicians, with a lot of resources in a group that's run by physicians can be very different. I take this message on the road, though, quite a bit to small hospitals in rural areas that are run by, non-physicians. And part of the language that I use there is that, one of the other things that we look at very carefully is physician empathy. So how empathic are physicians in their doctor-patient relationships? And burnout certainly also relates to that. And when you look at malpractice risk and risk to a hospital setting or to a group setting, it's much higher when a large percentage of that practicing body of physicians is struggling with burnout. So the language that groups like that will hear is that managing your physician's wellness is a risk management strategy. And it turns out that if your physicians have high empathy scores, and if your physicians are practicing in a way that they feel like what they do makes a difference, meaning they're not meeting the criteria for burnout, and you've addressed that in a systemic way, your malpractice risk is less, your patient satisfaction scores are higher, and the things that you measure that are tied to how you're paid as a physician actually get better. And that is usually incentive enough to start looking at the question. And it may not be, I would love to be able to say, I go in there and say, you should create a wellness program for your physician's sake. That might not work. But you should create a wellness program because it decreases your malpractice risk, increases your Press-Ganey scores, and drives patient satisfaction. That's a message that they hear. So it's about framing it in a way, data-driven. This is not voodoo. I'm making this, connection from here to there based on the medical evidence and what we know. But there is a compelling argument in every practice setting to focus on physician wellness that not just makes sense from a humanity point of view, but makes dollars and cents.
Thank you. Sutton Wills?
Hi, Doctor. Thanks for being here today. I think you talked about a lack of sustainability with in the practice that's leading younger physicians to leave the practice and might result in a lack of access.
Yeah.
Back at slide 14, can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so the data, and this is early data, but it's telling us that, so The issues with burnout have tended to skew to older physicians, mostly physicians, and this is before the Affordable Care Act, before, a lot of other, I remember I went to Davis for medical school, and I showed up to Davis in the early 90s. I remember doctors were telling me, oh, I wish you'd been here before. You're not going to like medicine because, it's changed so much. So this is before, the world that we have now where, people are ambivalent about, the structure that we have. The burnout rates and the risk of the attrition in physician workforce has mostly skewed to older physicians who are on the bubble of retirement. The data now is showing us that younger physicians tend to also have ambivalence about their careers as physicians. That's relatively new, and it's still early, but that trend tells us that there's a bimodal distribution in risk of physician attrition. Older patients or physicians who are on the cusp, and younger physicians who may actually make work-life balance decisions to opt out of full-time medicine. And if you can't find a residency director who hasn't already experienced graduating residents who say, I don't want to work full-time. I don't want to do that. I want to find a part-time job where I can, and this is a topic for another discussion, but part of it is how we train physicians now. We've gone to a lower, more manageable work week, but the trade-off is we treat patients as to-do lists as opposed to I have ownership over this patient from stem to stern. And that culture has now created a culture of graduates that are okay with making their work as a physician a job as opposed to a calling. And when you have a job, it's okay to have a part-time job. When you have a calling, you want to be there. And that's a fundamental shift in younger physicians. We cannot afford to lose additional physician capacity in California or any state. We don't have enough now. So that's when I say that's a worrisome trend, that's what I mean. And we don't, just like when you look at job numbers in general, how many people are no longer looking for work? How many physicians are no longer looking for full-time work?
Are there questions or comments from the room, the public? Oh. Dr. Levine?
Yeah, I want to address what you just said, or because I don't think this is a physician issue exclusively. This is a generational issue. And I think one of the reasons we're seeing, as you described, this bimodal curve, if you will, is that we have a generation of newly trained physicians entering the workforce who have a different attitude toward work in general. Yeah. And what has not fully happened is that the work environment has not accommodated a different set of values around work. More than 50% of the physician workforce are women.
Yes.
And to say that these physicians, whether they're men or women, who are looking for part-time work, don't see medicine as a calling is, to me, judging what a calling is by a 1950s sole provider in a family standard. Yeah. And I just don't think that's fair.
Well, I understand. So let me back up and say, just by way of full disclosure, I'm married to a physician who works part-time and has worked part-time, and I don't think she doesn't have a calling. What I meant was that there is when you start to look at medicine as a means to just having a job, which I do see in some, and I don't mean, and I'm not differentiating between men and women, or I'm just saying I've noticed in my experience that can happen for some physicians, and I think that can make an impact on whether or not they're fully accessible in the physician workforce. There are lots of reasons why physicians should and could and would want to work part-time. And I couldn't agree more and I don't think that's a bad idea, actually. In fact, I think it's a great idea that physicians have the option to work less than full-time. And I agree 100% that the environment that they work in often doesn't support that. If you have a person who would like to work part-time, job sharing, those options, very, very limited. And often practices will drive physicians away from part-time work because, again, from an administrative point of view, from a group practice model, they have to pay full freight on overhead like retirement and other things like that, but get half of the benefit of the physician. They're still paying for health insurance and things like that. Until we address and create options that are meaningful for physicians to work part-time, then I think it's always going to be a challenge because the environment doesn't really support that. But I stand corrected because I don't want to intimate that all physicians who choose to work part-time don't see medicine as a calling. And I am married to a woman who sees medicine as a calling and works part-time and has from the get-go. So I apologize.
Are there, last one, Dr. Kraus.
The amusing thing about a physician who works part-time is they're only working 40 hours a week.
Yes. I see you've met my wife.
Are there comments or questions from the phones?
No comments from the telephones.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sears.
Thank you very much again for
Thank
the
you.
invitation.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry. No one stepped up, but were there questions or comments from the room? Okay, thank you. Thanks again, Dr. Searles.
We'll invite you back again, I'm sure, part 2.
Next is a discussion on physician burnout survey. Ms. Kirschmeyer.
Well, good afternoon, members. Actually, I think Dr. Searles kind of queued up my comments today to some degree, and then I'll have to think about the reasons why afterwards. But anyway, so as some members may know, the leadership of the board of the Federation of State Medical Boards, their chair, Dr. Hanger, has actually made physician burnout and wellness a priority for the Federation and an issue they're actually been studying this past year and will continue to study. In addition, the reason we had Dr. Searles here today is because this is an issue of concern for our board as well. So in speaking with staff at the Federation, they would actually like to partner with the medical board to conduct a study on physician burnout and wellness here in California. The state of New York is actually already conducting a study on this issue, and on pages POEW 5-1 to 4 is a copy of the survey from the Medical Society of the State of New York. As you may be aware, the board has assisted with several physician surveys, as the board is the entity that reaches all physicians. As you will hear this afternoon in a presentation at the full board meeting, the board has partnered with UCSF for several years to gather information on Medi-Cal and electronic health records. In addition, the board recently worked with UCD on a survey regarding the CARES program. Because this is an issue of importance to the board, I believe that the board could send out a survey on physician burnout to physicians with their renewal notices to obtain data on physician burnout in California. While the board may not want to use the same survey as New York, and I would recommend actually making modifications, it could definitely use it as a guide. This information from 2 of the largest licensing boards in the United States could actually assist not only the Federation with their study on the issue, but could potentially identify ways to reduce physician burnout based on the findings. We could use this information to even help encourage physicians to find help. One thing I was just thinking as Dr. Schultz presented is, it was interesting with the opioid epidemic, it wasn't until it went higher for those deaths than car accidents that it really became an issue actually for America. I'm just thinking, maybe if we can put data behind some of the information, it might encourage individuals to go out and find help. I don't actually need a motion to move the survey forward, but I would like to get input from the members on such a survey and also find out if I could have a member of this committee or even of the board who would be interested in assisting with the development of such a survey. And then I would work with the Information Systems Branch staff to also develop that survey so that it could actually be implemented online. And with that, I'd like to open it up for questions or if I have anybody who would volunteer for such a survey.
I'm volunteering.
You're volunteering. Thank you, Dr. Levine.
Yeah, and I have a comment, not a question. That's okay?
Please, Dr. Levine.
I do think that how you word questions on a survey like this that are not leading, but in fact enable you to get information is very important. And I've had a lot of experience with homegrown surveys. Are you paid fairly? No. Would
anybody answer that? Yes.
Are you
probably
worth
not.
more than you're paid? Yes. Are you working too hard? Yes. So So I do think that there is an art and a science to the survey construction, and I do just looking at the questions on the New York survey, I think California is different enough than it warrants its own survey. So I'm happy to work with you.
I
on
really
this.
appreciate that. I was hoping you'd say that.
Ms. Kirschmeyer, do we know how the Federation is using these surveys? Have they told us?
They haven't. At this time, I think they're really in a gathering information point. I think New York's just actually went live, but they had reached out to me when I was back in Philadelphia for the USMLE. When I went back there, I talked to their individual that's really over research, and he said, this is something that's coming up in New York. It really is something that the Federation is taking on, but we really do need some data. So. Because we're the first largest, and then New York is the second largest, I think that's a good picture. So,
Additional comments from the board?
Well, just one other comment, which is there are other surveys out there. The Physicians Foundation,
okay,
which is a long story, but it's a 501c3 that monitors professional satisfaction and has for a number of years. And there's a resource that I think would be helpful for this board or this committee to hear from, which the American Medical Association in the last 5 years has put a lot of effort into developing resources for physicians to address both the workplace and the personal aspects. These resources are free to physicians. A lot of it is in fact available as online CME, and the woman who has really done incredible work on this is Dr. Christine Sinsky, Sinsky, and I think having Christine come and talk about her work on addressing the stressors in physician practice would be of interest to the board, because they've really begun to work hard on trying to find solutions.
fantastic. We're always looking for someone to come and speak, so that's great.
Thank you. Comments from the public in the room? Comments from the phones?
No comments from the phone.
Agenda item 6. Ms. Simone's will present this agenda item, which includes playing the board's tutorial.
Okay, so I just wanted to provide an update today on the board's outreach campaign and the activities that have occurred since the last October board meeting. And if anyone else has questions on any of the other activities on the chart, I'd be happy to discuss those too. The first item I would like to discuss is the public service announcement, or PSA, that has been on our Priority 1 activities. So staff has been discussing and planning on developing a public service announcement. However, staff has already developed a tutorial that shows patients how to check up on their doctor's license. And this tutorial is actually posted on the board's website right now. And basically what it does is it walks the patient through the board's website and explains how to look up discipline information. Board staff has been talking, and we believe this tutorial could possibly be used as our PSA. And as I say being used, it's, when we're working to get interviews with various entities, we can really tout this tutorial to show patients how to actually access the information on the board's website. So what I would like to do is to actually play the tutorial, and it's very short, so all the members can kind of see what the tutorial looks like, and then I can get input from you on if the members think that this could actually be used in the place of a PSA. So hold on a second.
Who's the audience for the PSA?
So basically we're encouraging patients to look up their doctor's license on their website. So this is geared towards a patient, like this is how you do that.
I've done that on the website. Is this something in addition?
No, I don't think everyone's looked it up on our website.
Okay.
We'll just take a quick second.
Have you seen it on the website? It's really
You don't need a stethoscope or any other special equipment to check up on your doctor's license. All you need is a computer and a few minutes. First, go to our website, www.mbc.ca.gov. Click on License Search. This can be done at 2 places on the main page, here or here. Click on Physician and Surgeon. Click on Search by Name. Enter your doctor's last name. Make sure you have the correct spelling. Enter the first initial of the doctor's first name, then click Search. Scroll down to see if any disciplinary actions are listed. If not, you will see none found. If there are actions, you will see found. and it looks like this. If you have any questions about what you are seeing, go to the physician profile description page. You can also email your questions to webmaster@mbc.ca.gov or call the board at 1-800-633-2322.
Thank you. Okay, so for purposes of a PSA that's really geared on this outreach campaign, we're kind of struggling with what we can do to make it different other than just walking them through how to actually do what we're encouraging them to do. So our thoughts have been, I know we're talking about the outreach campaign here, but to maybe work on a PSA on the board in general, not just geared towards physicians looking at their doctor's license, and also maybe doing a tutorial on walking patients through how to file a complaint. And so those are the two things we've been kind of thinking about, but I really want to get your input if you think we still need to develop another PSA or if this tutorial could suffice in that.
Comment.
Dr. Levine?
So I listened to this last week again, and I mean, I know how to do this, so I'm thinking with a different set of eyes. I just think it's a little fast, and I would maybe pause more often to give people a chance to, okay, here's where I need to go. I just find it's like a 78 instead of 33 in the third. For those of us who are my age, would know that, but you youngsters don't. But okay, you understand?
I do understand, and I kind of see where you're coming from. I think what we were trying to do is not lose people and still walk them through the process, but some of the tutorials that we watched in the past from other boards have been really slow, so I think we were trying to, but, I mean, we could definitely look at slowing it down, but, so if we were to slow it down, do you think that could take the place of it, or would you think another PSA would be better?
There's certain sections that you really want them to get, and so there are certain sections I would just say, wait, how to actually look up the name. I don't know, I'm just throwing out things.
No, that's helpful.
And then you take the board number and you have it for 2 seconds and it's gone.
It doesn't show up.
Dr. Kraus?
Get to, I'm sorry.
Dr. Kraus?
I think it's great, but I agree with Dr. Lewis.
Too fast.
And I will share with you that as I was watching it, I found that musical background to be terribly distracting and incongruous.
Rather it be silent, or?
So, no, some background is okay, but
So we'll do some music research.
I was expecting to see, some smiling animated character pop up into the screen.
Okay.
So work on that.
Okay.
That's Sutton Wills.
How would you get to that tutorial?
So it's actually on our homepage, and it's on the homepage, and I think it says check up on your doctor's license tutorials, right? If you go to our homepage.
I wonder if that's preaching to the converted. Maybe if you reach different audiences and just say, perhaps to radio audiences or other audiences in specific markets, did you know that you can look up your doctor?
And I think that's what we were kind of planning with the PSA, which is why I'm coming here to you today. Do you think this tutorial could be used? So we were planning on reaching out to like iHeartRadio and certain, places like that where we could say on our website is this tutorial, or even show the tutorial. So I guess what I'm trying to get from the committee is, do you think this could actually work as that if we kind of look at some of the things that you guys are suggesting now? Or do you think we should do a whole new PSA? And if so, maybe if you have, we don't have to do it at the committee meeting today, but if you have ideas of what that separate PSA would be, staff would really be, it would be really helpful if you could let us know what your ideas were.
Dr. Warmoth? Will you finish, Sutton Wills?
Well, to continue, I think that I would find it helpful as a community member just to hear that you can look up your doctor at this website.
Okay.
And then when you get to the website, there's a tutorial.
Okay, so just something that's more general and broad and encouraging people just to look on our website. Okay.
Yeah, and then it's very accessible once you get there.
Okay.
Dr. Warmoth?
Along the same lines, I would say first off, the main point is that we want to get them to our website.
Okay.
And because the website is actually pretty clear about how to actually go through the process.
Okay.
It's to get them there, so having it as a tutorial on the website.
So it sounds kind of like we're hearing the PSA would be more of like getting them to our website, and then once you get there, you have the tutorial. Okay.
And one thing that I would add along those same lines, much like I did when you had a question and they told you to go to the webmaster, there was a crawl that said,
Go to
printed
this.
it out.
Okay.
We should be doing the same thing when she speaks about mbc.ca.gov.
Okay.
It should be printed there.
All right, that sounds good.
Dr. Levine?
So building on my colleague's comments, I think that the purpose of the PSA should be, 3-inch headline, which is, did you know the Medical Board of California ensures that doctors who are licensed in California are entitled to that license, not this language, obviously, and that when there is a problem, the medical board investigates, and basically talking only about licensing and enforcement, the main purposes, in the name of consumer protection, and then using a PSA to drive traffic to the website.
And I think Kim wants to say something, but that's kind of what we were talking about when we were talking about a general PSA on more of the board in general, not just on this outreach campaign, but I'll let Kim kind of.
No, I think exactly what you're talking about, Dr. Levine, is what we want to do about what the board does. And so maybe we can actually incorporate how Jennifer was saying we want to spend time on this PSA about the board. Maybe we turn that into what you're looking for the outreach campaign. It won't really be for the outreach campaign, but it'll drive them to the outreach campaign, basically, is what you're saying. I know when we had gone to the board member orientation training, when they did the video on DCA, that's what we were talking about. Let's do one, and then maybe, I don't know if it's possible, but then we could branch it off, like, sending people to go check, this is what we do, one thing we can do, and then there's a tutorial here. And then for the complaint, if we kind of run it with our next thing that we really want to do, which my complaint unit is wanting to do, talking about a tutorial for complaints, then we can drive it actually to those 2 items, which are the main functions of the medical board. Does that sound like
That
kind of
sounds
the idea?
Yes,
Okay.
and to the point of the slowing down versus fast, where you need to slow down the speed is the web address and the phone numbers. So I can't tell you the number of times I've tried to scribble a phone number I heard on television, usually for the wrong reason. But in any event, slowing down the or the reading of the web address and slowing down the speaking of the phone number to contact them would.
Perfect.
Great.
Great. Comments from the public? Marianne Hollingsworth?
Hello, I just thought I'd ask you, when a doctor has a different name with his license than what he uses with his patients, it's often difficult to find that doctor on the medical board website. And what would you do to help? Like in cases of Williams or Patel or Miller, where there's, there could be 100 or 200 doctors. I can think of one that has a name like Jurston for his first name, but goes by Jerry on everything. So a friend of mine was trying to look that up and could not find him anywhere. So how could you adjust the website to help cases like that?
I'm not sure that we could adjust the website because they're under the name that they've reported to the medical board. But I do know that our complaint or our file or our phone line can actually help people look them up and try different things with them. And so while it may not work just to go to their website if they're using a different name, and they shouldn't be totally using a different name than they have on our website, but if they are doing that, I know in the past our phone room's been able to kind of work with people to walk them through and try to help them find that physician. So either be it through the license number or just kind of trying different things.
Okay, maybe that could be added if you can't find.
Yeah, maybe we
your
could add
physician.
something like that in our PSA.
Because I know, like with the California Contractors Licensing Board, or even with the California Bar, you look up somebody, and it's usually pretty quick to get their information, but there are a few more steps with the medical board. So if you could make that clear so people are having trouble, to please call to find out, that would be helpful.
I think we could definitely add that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there additional comments from the public?
Thank you, Dr. Hawkins. I'll fill out a slip later. Julie D'Angelo Felmuth from the Center for Public Interest Law. I've only seen this once, so it was fast. But it seems to me that one of the most important aspects of your website and one of the most important opportunities you offer to the public is you had the list of not found, nothing found, nothing found, nothing found. Then you had found 2. I think you need to go and say, if you click on that, you can read actual disciplinary decisions so that you can make an informed decision about whether you want to visit this physician.
That's a good idea.
So
And
just go one step further about found.
what you do, what happens when you click that. Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Appreciate the input.
Additional comments? Are there comments from the phones?
No comments from the phone.
Okay, so I'm going to continue on with my update. That was just the first little box. Okay, so the next update is board staff actually developed a color flyer entitled Be an Informed Patient, Check Up on Your Doctor's License. This flyer is actually included your packet in the last page in this tab, page 8. And this flyer also includes a quick response or QR code that can be scanned by an electronic device, and the browser will be taken directly to the board's website. This will allow the board to obtain statistics on the number of individuals who use that QR code to get to the board's website. These flyers are actually going to be included, printed, and sent to the state controller's office to include with pay warrants for all active state civil service employees and UC employees on March 1st. And that's about 265,000 individuals. March 5th through 11th, 2017 is National Consumer Protection Week, and the board can also use this flyer for other outreach as well. The next update, again with the pay warrants, we're also going to have another little global message. I don't know if you remember, we did this last year on the April 2017 state warrants, and that will again reach everyone that gets paid by the state, which is 440,000 individuals. In November, copies of our outreach campaign materials were sent to the Los Angeles County Health Department as they are planning a broad web-based healthcare outreach program for LA County consumers, and they are interested in using these materials and linking to some of the board's resources. So that's another contact that we made. An article written by the board's Public Affairs Office regarding the board's Checkup on Your Doctor's License campaign was submitted to DCA for their winter issue of the Consumer Connection magazine, and I think Lisa handed these out to you. Yeah, perfect. And it's actually now in print and posted on the board's website, so this is what the front of the magazine looks like, and we actually got a whole page in there, so that's pretty nice, and this is geared towards consumers. And there's actually handouts in the back, too. And the outreach campaign, we're continuing to partner with stakeholders to encourage patients to check up on their doctor's license. And we will be continuing to reach out to counties, cities, unions, other large community organizations, and legislative offices. And that includes, I'll be meeting with, attempting to meet with all the new legislators, which is a lot. We're kind of doing our sunset meetings first, and then we'll be hitting the new legislators. So we will be sure to, talk to them about this campaign and encourage them to have their constituents check up on their doctor's license. So that concludes my update. Is there any questions?
Great
Are
work.
comments from the
Thank you.
public? Comments from the phones?
No comments from the phone.
The next agenda item is update and discussion on public affairs, office outreach activities. Ms. Kirchmeier, need to be a better steward of the time. It's 2 o'clock.
I can speak quickly for those of you that know. I would like to take this opportunity to point out some outreach activities that are outside the board's outreach campaign that I believe are a great success for the board. As was briefly discussed at the last meeting, we have several medical associations and societies that have been reprinting our newsletter articles in their publications. Articles such as mandatory reporting requirements for physicians and others, telehealth and the law, common questions received by the medical board, Through Your Patient's Eyes, which actually was an article addressing the opioid misuse and abuse issues, frequently asked questions about cures, news to use, physicians encouraged to use care when advertising, are just a few of the articles that have actually been reprinted. We also recently had requests to print an article on human trafficking in California, what role can a physician play, and a few other articles from our fall newsletter. So those are all getting reprinted. In regard to presentations, I think we have had a tremendously successful 2016, and 2017 has actually even started out better. Board staff have provided presentations to UCFS residents with the help of Dr. Lewis. We've provided presentations to medical assistant associations regarding the scope of practice of medical assistants, and provided presentations to the Southern California chapter of the American Academy of Psychiatry and Law on the board's enforcement process and 805 reporting. HQIU medical consultants gave a lecture to staff at Kaiser Santa Clara regarding strategies for physicians to remain in compliance with the law, and board staff provided presentations at other DCA board meetings on End-of-Life Option Act and the board's expert reviewer program. Continued presentations at the California Ambulatory Surgery Association annual meeting, toured an ambulatory surgery center, and then provided information on the board's processes pertaining to outpatient surgery centers. We've provided presentations to seniors at crime prevention fairs and provided information on the board to the California Association of Medical Staff Services. Staff has provided presentations on the board at several town hall events in association with the local legislative members and provided a presentation at the Coalition for Physician Enhancement meeting and provided several presentations on the board's guidelines for prescribing controlled substances for pain with board members. Thank you, Dr. Bishop, for assisting me. I'm also providing these presentations. This is just a few of the outreach events the board has conducted. We already have several lined up for 2017. In addition, we have built partnerships with local law enforcement agencies and other state agencies, including DCA boards. We recently provided a presentation to the Department of Healthcare Services on the board's enforcement process and ways we can work together. We have also asked their staff to provide a presentation on their enforcement process to our enforcement staff so we can provide information back and forth to each other. We've provided information at the District Attorneys Association on the End-of-Life Option Act, which actually opened up an opportunity to discuss how we also need to work with them and how important a notification to the board is if they are investigating a physician. We've built a better relationship, or a great relationship, with some of the larger physician associations. A lot of the violations that the board finds are based on physicians who are not educated on the laws and regulations in the Medical Practice Act. I know several board members as well as staff has provided presentations on the board, its roles, and how to stay in compliance with the law. We recently established a PowerPoint presentation that any member can use to provide such a presentation. So if you ever get contacted, please let me know and I will forward that on. Dr. Levine, I believe, has used it, and Dr. Gonadev. Lastly, I would like to let you know of a recent relationship we have built with the California Primary Care Association, or CPCA. The CPCA represents about 1,000 community clinics and health centers in the state of California who serve our low-income populations. I was recently introduced to their chief medical officer, and this has opened the door to great partnership. In a very short time, we've not only met with a few members of their executive team, but I was invited at the beginning of January to their clinician committee, where I talked about the board and its licensing process and the CARES program. Then on January 18th, and this is what's exciting, the board did its first webinar on the board's licensing process entitled Demystifying the Medical Board's Licensing Process. The webinar was a great success. We also developed a great PowerPoint that can be used by staff and board members in the future. In addition, through this partnership, CPCA has agreed to disseminate information to physicians from the board or other notices for physicians. We recently sent information on potential changes to the DEA renewal process to CPCA and also information on the CARES 1.0 decommission. We also are able to send these types of notices to the California Hospital Association, where we've also built a very good relationship, as well as the California Medical Association. While the consumer outreach campaign has enhanced the board's mission of consumer protection by notifying patients of the importance of checking on their physician and encouraging them to make a complaint if they believe there's a violation of the law, I believe that educating physicians on important laws and changes in laws will also assist in the board's mission of consumer protection, and that's one of our goals. And for this committee, it's a goal of the board. So with that, are there any questions?
Thank you.
Is that fast enough?
Comments from the board? Comments from the public? Comments from the phone?
No comments from the phone.
Agenda item 8. Do committee members have any agenda items for the next meeting? Future agenda items. Dr. Kraus?
Either in the context of our committee or the full board, and if it's not agended for this full board meeting, we should have an update on the physician health and wellness program. And at some point, either through a task force or through a committee meeting, we need to begin to take another look at physician use of marijuana, especially in light of California now allowing recreational marijuana, and what our concerns may be regarding increased access and potential increased use. That would be an ideal topic if we could find a physician scientist who could actually give us a presentation to have us understand as a committee more fully the impact and mind-altering effects of marijuana before we make any decisions about it.
Thank you, Dr. Kraus. Dr. Levine?
Just as I said before, scheduling for either a committee or board meeting, Dr. Sinsky from the AMA on interventions to assist physicians in managing the stress of the stressors in clinical practice. And there may be a resource with the Colorado Medical Board, who has had to deal with the issue of recreational marijuana and how they have what they've done in terms of addressing physician impairment.
Thank you very much. Comments from the public? From the phones?
No comments from the phones.
Well, thank you very much. Sorry to go over. My apologies to the Enforcement Committee. The meeting's adjourned at 2:10 p.m.